Good morning, and thank you for joining me on the Path to Liberty. I'm Michael Bolden with the 10th Amendment Center, and this is the Fast Friday edition of the show for March 15th, 2024. And tomorrow in history, March 16th, I believe 1751, James Madison was born. So we're celebrating James Madison's birthday, and I know many people know him as the father of the Constitution, but it seems like very few people know his actual views on the Constitution and how to enforce it. And so for that, on this episode, we say happy birthday with a dirty dozen. For me, I've got my top 12 favorite quotes, at least for today, from Madison himself. And since each quote in and of itself could require a deep dive to look into it much further, in the show notes for this episode, which Alan Mosley will get organized and I will get published a couple hours after this live stream is done, we'll link to a bunch of other episodes. I think we've got 10 or so of them covering Madison's views on other issues in more detail. Things like the national bank, war and peace, property rights, strategy for stopping the feds, and a bunch more. But let's kick off this dirty dozen, this top 12 quotes from Madison on the Constitution and how to enforce it. From Federalist number 45, which I think is his best overview of the entire structure of the Constitution itself. The powers delegated by the proposed Constitution to the federal government are few and defined. Those which are to remain in the state governments are numerous and indefinite. This is a precursor, really, to what we got with the 10th Amendment. And proponents of the Constitution throughout the ratification debates explain the meaning of these various phrases. Now, there was some debate over them, but James Madison discussed many of them throughout his career, during ratification and well after as well. So, for example, let's look at some of the big clauses that are used, misused, and abused more than any others, like the General Welfare Clause. Here's Madison in the House of Representatives in 1792. He said, "It would be absurd to say that Congress may do what they please." And that's how people who love power have always treated clauses like this. They're looking at general welfare and they say, well, we can do whatever the heck we want. But Madison said that would be absurd. He said, in fact, the meaning of the general terms in question must either be sought in the subsequent enumerations which limits and details them, or they convert the government from one limited as hitherto supposed to the enumerated powers into a government without any limits at all. So to treat the General Welfare Clause as the anything-everything clause is to give them unlimited power. Now, discussing commerce, here's a letter to Joseph C. Cabell. He said, "It is very certain that it grew out of the abuse of the power by the importing states in taxing the non-importing. And it was intended as a negative and preventative provision against injustice among the states themselves, rather than as a power to be used for the positive purposes of the general government." This was not a tool to give the general or federal government a bunch of power over our everyday lives. We also have the Necessary and Proper Clause. Here's his speech, one of his speeches opposing the First National Bank. He said, "Whatever meaning this clause may have, none can be admitted that would give an unlimited discretion to Congress. Its meaning must, according to the natural and obvious force of the terms and the context, be limited to means necessary to the end and incident to the nature of the specified powers." Madison here is telling the people who understood this very well, at least at the time, that the Necessary and Proper Clause was based on the legal doctrine of principles and incidents. We've got a whole episode that we'll be linking to in the show notes discussing Madison's views on necessary and proper. But he goes a little further. He said, "The clause is, in fact, merely declaratory of what would have resulted by unavoidable implication as the appropriate and, as it were, technical means of executing those powers. In this sense, it had been explained by the friends of the Constitution and ratified by the state conventions." And Madison here is really kind of getting into how you actually understand the original legal meaning of the Constitution. Some people have told us that it's all about just understanding what was in the minds of the people who debated in secret in Philadelphia. But that's absolutely incorrect. To have the legal meaning of the Constitution correct, you have to understand it how the people who gave it legal force understood it at the time they did that. That is, the ratification conventions. And that's how he reiterated it in a letter to Henry Lee years later, 1824. He said, "I entirely concur in the propriety of resorting to the sense in which the Constitution was accepted and ratified by the nation. In that sense alone, it is the legitimate Constitution." So any other views for any other reason these are just not legitimate. Madison continued, and he explained why it was a problem to do anything else. He said, "If the meaning of the text be sought in the changeable meaning of the words composing it, it is evident that the shape and attributes of the government must partake of the changes to which the words and phrases of all living languages are constantly subject. What a metamorphosis would be produced in the code of law if all its ancient phraseology were to be taken in its modern sense." And of course, people want us today to believe that the federal government has the power to just define words in an 18th century legal document using modern definitions. And many times they've changed within just years of ratification. So Madison is saying you have to go back to understand how they understood it at the time of ratification. And here he is telling us what the wisest part of the Constitution is, writing as Helvidius in 1793. He said, "In no part of the Constitution is more wisdom to be found than in the clause which confides the question of war or peace to the legislature and not to the executive department." But constitutions, no matter how well you can describe the original legal meaning of them, they don't enforce themselves. Words on paper cannot, never will enforce themselves. They never have, and we should never expect them to do so. And Madison discussed this in Federalist Paper number 48 as well. He said, "Will it be sufficient to mark with precision the boundaries of these departments in the Constitution of Government, and to trust to these parchment barriers against the encroaching spirit of power?" So he's saying that a constitution is really nothing more than a parchment barrier. Of course, the better that you can write it, the more clear that it is, the better results you can have. But if you're just relying on the document itself, waving a document at tyrants is not a really good strategy to get them to stop. Madison continues. He said, "This is kind of how many people have approached this, even back at that time." He said, "This is the security which appears to have been principally relied on by the compilers of most of the American constitutions. But experience assures us that the efficacy of the provision has been greatly overrated, and that some more adequate defense is indispensably necessary for the more feeble against the more powerful members of the government." So something beyond just words on paper needs to happen in order to deal with usurpations of power, those exercises of power which are not authorized to whoever it may be, whatever department of the government, whatever branch. And he wrapped up Federalist number 48 with this: "A mere demarcation on parchment of the constitutional limits of the several departments is not a sufficient guard against those encroachments which lead to a tyrannical concentration of all the powers of government in the same hands." And he discusses who has the final say on this in his report of 1800, discussing the Alien and Sedition Acts and the resolutions of Virginia passed in response to them in 1798. And he points out that the Constitution was formed by the sanction of the states, given by each in its sovereign capacity. And he also points out in this report that you can define the word states in many ways, including state governments, a particular land mass. But he says states in this capacity, it means the people composing those political societies in their highest sovereign capacity. Sovereignty means final authority to the founding generation. And Madison is saying that the people of the several states in their highest sovereign capacity, they are the ones that form the Constitution of the United States. And he said, the states then being the parties to the constitutional compact and in their sovereign capacity, it follows of necessity that there can be no tribunal above their authority to decide in the last resort whether the compact made by them be violated. Turning to the government, the creation, to determine if it violated the rules that the people of the several states gave to it when they created it is a guarantee that that government power will always grow and grow and grow. Now, Madison didn't necessarily say you had to make this decision, this call in the states on every issue, but he certainly said in the last resort, they're the ones to decide, the people of the several states. And going back to his Virginia resolutions of 1798, he described it like this: in case of a deliberate, palpable, and dangerous exercise of other powers not granted by the said compact, the states who are parties thereto have a right and are in duty bound to interpose for arresting the progress of the evil and for maintaining within their respective limits the authorities, rights, and liberties appertaining to them. So to stop the feds, James Madison also told us all the way back in Federalist number 46 during the ratification debate, 1788, he said very similar. He said that you have to have a disobedience by the people, outspoken governors, use state legislative devices, and, quote, a refusal to cooperate with officers of the Union. Now, he described things, there's different strategies for every specific issue. You can't apply the exact same thing in the exact same way, but certainly we know that according to James Madison in Federalist 46, in the Virginia resolutions, again, in his report of 1800, that going to the government to convince the government to stop doing what the government was never supposed to do in the first place is not how you deal with usurpations of power. It's really ultimately up to the people of the states to get the job done. And later in his career, very late, in 1834, he wrote some notes on nullification where he repeatedly slammed on the process, the doctrine of South Carolina, a way of nullifying that South Carolina had proposed. But at the same time, he supported it as a general principle. And he said the right of nullification meant by Mr. Jefferson is the natural right, which all admit to be a remedy against insupportable oppression. So the right of nullification is not something that you get from a document. You don't have to get permission from anyone. This is a natural right. It's a revolutionary right in some ways as well. And everyone, he's saying, everyone at the time of the founding actually admitted that this would be a remedy against insupportable oppression. And one more as a bonus before we head out. This is James Madison, the 10ther, I guess. This is also from his report of 1800. Again, all this will be linked to in the show notes at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path-to-liberty. He said the powers not given to the government were withheld from it, and that if any doubt could have existed on this subject under the original text of the Constitution, it is removed as far as words could remove it by the 12th Amendment, which is now the 10th Amendment, now a part of the Constitution, which expressly declares that the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution nor prohibited by it to the states are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode, this quick take on James Madison's top views on the structure of the Constitution and how to enforce it. If you want to help us reach and teach more and more people about these essential foundational principles, absolutely nothing helps us roll up our sleeves every single day and get this kind of work done and reach and teach more people more than the financial faith and support of our members. If you got a couple of bucks of that dirty government fiat, please consider throwing it our way over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. We have monthly options from just $2 a month. Annual, 5-year, and lifetime options. You can also go to 10thamendmentcenter.com/donate for a one-time donation, whatever. I appreciate any consideration you can give to joining and supporting us today. And if you're not able to do that, that's cool as well. We'll keep doing this show. And you can also help us with some free and easy peasy ways of spreading the word, like leaving reviews on Apple Podcasts, smashing the like button, subscribing, getting notifications, leaving comments, sharing links, etc. I really appreciate you being here. A quick reminder that I will be off on Monday, but I'll be back to my regular schedule on next week, Wednesday. I hope you have an awesome weekend, and I hope to see you next time here on the Path to Liberty.